The emergency room at Walter Reed Medical Center buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as medical staff moved between patients with practiced efficiency. Navy Hospital Corpsman Second Class. Marcus Rodriguez had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, his hands steady despite the exhaustion that weighed heavy on his shoulders. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he finished suturing a young Marine's shoulder wound. The 19-year-old had taken shrapnel during a training exercise at Quantico, and Marcus worked with the gentle precision that had earned him respect among both patients and colleagues. His own service record spoke of 2 deployments to Afghanistan, where he had saved countless lives under fire. "Room 7 needs attention," called out Dr. Sarah Chen, the attending physician who had become something of a mentor to Marcus over the past year. Her voice carried the urgency that meant serious business, not the routine injuries that filled most of their evening. Marcus nodded, grabbing a fresh pair of gloves from the dispenser. The familiar snap of latex against his wrists had become second nature, a small ritual that helped center his mind before each new patient. He had learned early in his career that every person who came through those doors carried their own story, their own pain that went far beyond whatever physical wounds brought them to his care. The walk to room 7 felt longer than usual, though Marcus couldn't explain why. Something in Dr. Chen's tone had triggered an old instinct, the same sixth sense that had kept him alive during his tours overseas. It was the feeling that came right before everything changed. When the world shifted just enough to remind you that nothing was ever truly predictable. As he approached the door, Marcus could hear muffled voices from inside. A woman's voice strained with pain but trying to maintain composure, mixed with the calmer tones of a nurse taking vitals. The sounds painted a picture in his mind of someone trying very hard to appear stronger than they felt, a trait he recognized all too well from his time in combat zones. Marcus paused outside the door, taking a deep breath and running through the mental checklist that had become automatic over his 8 years of service. Check the chart first, assess the situation, maintain professional demeanor, provide the best possible care. It was a routine that had served him well through everything from battlefield medicine to late-night emergency room shifts. The chart outside the door told him the basics. Female patient mid-20s brought in by ambulance after a vehicle accident on the Beltway. Multiple contusions, possible concussion, stable but requiring observation. The kind of case he handled several times a week. Nothing that should have caused the strange tension he felt building in his chest. But as Marcus pushed open the door and stepped inside, his world tilted in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour or his exhaustion. The patient sat on the examination table, her uniform torn and bloodied from the accident. She held herself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to military discipline, even in pain. It wasn't her injuries that stopped Marcus cold. It wasn't the way she looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face, or even the obvious signs that she had been through something terrible. What froze him completely, what made his hands shake for the first time since his rookie days, was the emblem sewn into her uniform jacket. The distinctive insignia caught the harsh hospital lighting and seemed to burn itself into his vision. It was a symbol he had seen only once before, under circumstances that still haunted his dreams. The memory came flooding back with crystal clarity, transporting him instantly to a dusty outpost in Helmand Province, where everything had gone wrong in ways that still didn't make sense. 3 years ago, Marcus had been part of a medical team attached to a forward operating base. They had received word of casualties from a classified mission, soldiers who needed immediate medical attention. The details were sparse, the kind of operation where questions weren't encouraged and answers weren't forthcoming. When the helicopters had arrived that night, bringing wounded soldiers back from whatever had happened in the darkness beyond their perimeter, Marcus had worked on a young woman wearing that same emblem. She had been unconscious, badly injured, and he had fought for hours to keep her stable. He never learned her name, never discovered what unit she belonged to, never found out if she had survived the night. The official reports had been sanitized, scrubbed clean of details that might have explained what had happened. All Marcus knew was that people had died, that the mission had been classified at levels far above his security clearance, and that he had been ordered never to discuss what he had seen that night. Now, 3 years later, that same emblem sat before him again, worn by a different woman, but carrying the same weight of secrets and shadows. Marcus felt his training war with his curiosity, his professional duty battling against questions that had kept him awake for months after that night in Afghanistan. The woman on the examination table looked at him with growing concern, clearly wondering why her medic had suddenly frozen in the doorway. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the same controlled strength he remembered from that night overseas. "Corpsman, I'm fine," she said, though the bruising on her face and the careful way she held her left arm suggested otherwise. "Really, this is just routine stuff. I've had worse." Marcus forced himself to move, to fall back on the training that had never failed him before. But as he approached the examination table, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't coincidence. In a military as large as theirs, in a world full of bases and hospitals and random assignments, what were the odds that he would encounter that emblem twice? More importantly, what were the odds that both times the person wearing it would end up under his care, injured and vulnerable, carrying secrets that someone clearly didn't want revealed? As Marcus began his examination, his hands steady despite the storm of questions in his mind, he couldn't help but wonder if this meeting was as random as it appeared, or if something far more complicated was unfolding around them both. Marcus forced his hands to remain steady as he began the examination, though his mind raced with questions he couldn't voice. The woman before him introduced herself simply as Sergeant Riley Thompson, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Despite her injuries, she maintained perfect military bearing, back straight and eyes alert. "What unit are you with, Sergeant?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone casual as he checked her pupils for signs of concussion. The question was routine, part of the standard intake process, but her slight hesitation told him it wasn't going to receive a routine answer. "I'm between assignments right now," she replied, which wasn't really an answer at all. Marcus had heard enough non-answers during his military career to recognize evasion when he heard it. The emblem on her uniform suggested a unit that didn't officially exist, at least not in any organizational chart he had ever seen. As he examined the cut on her forehead, Marcus noticed other details that troubled him. Her uniform, while standard issue in most respects, had subtle differences. The fabric was of higher quality, the stitching more precise. Small modifications that spoke of specialized equipment for specialized people. Her boots were standard military issue but showed wear patterns, consistent with extensive travel and varied terrain. "The accident report says you were traveling alone on the beltway when another vehicle ran you off the road," Marcus said, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "Were you heading to or from Andrews?" It was a reasonable question, since Andrews Air Force Base was the logical destination for most military personnel in the area. Again, that slight pause. "Something like that," Thompson said, her eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. There was something in her expression, a guardedness that went beyond normal military protocol. She was evaluating him, Marcus realized, just as carefully as he was evaluating her. The examination revealed multiple contusions consistent with a vehicle accident, but Marcus noticed other marks as well. Faded scars on her hands and arms that spoke of previous injuries, the kind that came from dangerous work rather than training accidents. Her reflexes were sharp, too sharp for someone who had just been in a serious car crash. This was someone who had been trained to function through pain and disorientation. "Corpsman Rodriguez," she said suddenly, reading his name tape. "You served overseas." "Afghanistan?" Marcus nodded, wondering how she could tell. He had long since stopped wearing any deployment patches or unit insignia that would identify where he had served. "2 tours, he confirmed. "You?" "Here and there," she said, which was another non-answer. But something in her tone suggested she knew more about his service record than a casual meeting would explain. "You were attached to medical teams at forward operating bases, weren't you? Smaller outposts, classified missions?" The questions were too specific to be casual conversation. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that this meeting might not be as coincidental as he had first thought. "Sometimes," he said carefully. "It's not unusual for corpsmen to be assigned wherever medical support is needed." Thompson winced as he checked her injured arm, but her eyes never left his face. 3 years ago, Helmand Province. Fob Whiskey. You were there for about 2 weeks in September. Marcus's hands stilled. Fob Whiskey was not a name that appeared in any official records. It had been a temporary forward position, set up to support operations that had never been officially acknowledged. The fact that she knew about it, knew his exact assignment dates, meant she had access to information that was classified far above her apparent rank. "I think you have me confused with someone else," Marcus said. But even as he spoke the words, he knew it was pointless. The look in her eyes told him she knew exactly who he was and exactly what he had seen that night. "The woman you worked on," Thompson continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The one with the head injury and the punctured lung. The one wearing the same emblem." She touched the insignia on her uniform. "Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. She was my partner." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. All these years he had wondered about that nameless patient, whether she had survived, what had happened to her after she was evacuated. The lack of follow-up information had been unusual, even for classified operations. Medical personnel typically received some kind of confirmation about patient outcomes, if only for psychological reasons. "She died 2 days later at Landstuhl," Thompson said, answering the question Marcus couldn't bring himself to ask. "Internal bleeding that the field surgery couldn't repair. But she lived long enough to tell me about the corpsman who saved her life that night, who gave her enough time to complete her mission report." Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. Though whether from exhaustion or shock, he couldn't tell. The woman he had fought so hard to save, whose blood he could still sometimes see on his hands in quiet moments, had died anyway. And somehow her partner had tracked him down 3 years later. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Thompson looked around the examination room, her eyes checking the corners and the door with the automatic wariness of someone accustomed to surveillance. "Because Sarah's mission wasn't completed. Because the people who killed her are still out there. And because you're one of only 3 people who know what really happened that night." "I don't know anything," Marcus protested. "I never received briefings about the mission. I just treated the wounded and followed orders." "But you saw things," Thompson said. "You saw the equipment they brought back. You saw the wounds that didn't match the official story. You're trained to notice details, to put pieces together. Sarah said you were asking questions, the right kind of questions." Marcus remembered that night more clearly than he wanted to. The wounded soldiers had been carrying gear he didn't recognize, weapons that didn't match standard-issue equipment. Their injuries had been consistent with close-quarters combat. But the official report had described a vehicle accident during a routine patrol. "Even if that's true," Marcus said, "I've been ordered never to discuss what happened." "Those orders came from very high up the chain of command." Thompson nodded grimly. "The same people who issued those orders are the ones who killed Sarah. The same people who arranged for my car accident tonight." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "This wasn't random, Corpsman Rodriguez. They know I've been investigating Sarah's death. They know I've been trying to contact the witnesses from that night." "You're saying someone tried to kill you?" Marcus asked, though even as he spoke he realized he believed her. The professional way she had assessed the room, her detailed knowledge of classified operations, the fact that she had sought him out specifically, it all pointed to something far more serious than a traffic accident. "I'm saying they're cleaning house," Thompson replied. "And unless we work together, we're both going to end up like Sarah, dead with our files sealed and our service records classified beyond recognition." Outside the examination room, Marcus could hear the normal sounds of hospital life continuing. But inside room 7, he felt as though he had stepped into a different world entirely, one where 3-year-old secrets were still worth killing for, and where a chance meeting might be the only thing standing between truth and a cover-up that reached to the highest levels of military command. Marcus finished bandaging Thompson's wounds while his mind processed everything she had told him. The routine medical procedures felt surreal against the backdrop of her revelations, as if he were treating someone for a scraped knee while discussing nuclear secrets. Every few minutes he found himself glancing at the door, half expecting someone to burst in and demand answers to questions he wasn't supposed to know existed. "You need to understand something," Thompson said as Marcus checked her chart one final time. "Sarah and I weren't just partners in whatever unit you think we belonged to. We were investigating something that goes back years, maybe decades. That night in Afghanistan wasn't the beginning. It was just when everything started falling apart." Marcus pulled up a chair, abandoning any pretense that this was a normal patient interaction. "What kind of investigation?" Thompson looked at him carefully, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Equipment theft, weapons trafficking, but not the kind you read about in the news. Military-grade technology being sold to people who shouldn't have access to it. The kind of technology that can change the balance of power in entire regions." You're talking about someone inside the military selling weapons to enemies? Marcus asked, though he kept his voice low. The implications were staggering. Not just someone, Thompson replied. A network. People with enough rank and access to move equipment without triggering security protocols. People with enough influence to cover their tracks and eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. Marcus remembered the unusual equipment he had seen that night at FOB Whiskey. Advanced communications gear, weapons with modifications he didn't recognize, body armor that seemed far beyond standard issue. At the time, he had assumed it was simply classified technology being field-tested by special operations units. The mission that night, Marcus said slowly. It wasn't a patrol that went wrong. You were investigating these people, Thompson nodded grimly. Sarah had been tracking shipments for months. Someone was using forward operating bases as distribution points, taking advantage of the chaos and limited oversight to move stolen equipment. We finally had enough evidence to identify one of the key players, a major who was supposed to be coordinating supply lines but was actually running his own private arms dealing operation. So what went wrong? We underestimated how deep this goes, Thompson said. The major wasn't working alone. When we moved to arrest him, we found ourselves surrounded by people we thought we could trust. Our own backup teams had been compromised. Sarah and I barely escaped, and even then, we both knew we wouldn't make it back without help. Marcus began to understand why that night had felt so strange, why the official reports had been so sanitized. The attack on your unit wasn't from enemy forces. It was friendly fire made to look like an ambush, Thompson confirmed. They killed 6 good soldiers that night to cover their tracks. Would have killed Sarah and me too if we hadn't been luckier and better trained than they expected. The weight of what she was telling him settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. He had always known that night was different, that something about the official story didn't add up, but he had never imagined it was because American soldiers had been killed by other Americans to protect a criminal conspiracy. Why come to me now? Marcus asked. It's been 3 years. Why not go to the proper authorities? Thompson's laugh was bitter. I tried that. Filed reports through every channel I could think of. Know what happened? My security clearance was suspended pending investigation. I was transferred to a desk job processing paperwork for routine medical supplies. Every superior I tried to contact either claimed no knowledge of the operation or suggested I might be suffering from post-traumatic stress. They buried it. Completely. But they made one mistake. They kept me alive, probably because killing me immediately after I started asking questions would have been too obvious. Instead, they tried to discredit me, make me look unstable or unreliable. What they didn't count on was that I'm stubborn and patient. Marcus could believe that. Even injured and in obvious pain, Thompson projected a determination that was almost frightening in its intensity. This was someone who had spent 3 years planning, gathering information, waiting for the right opportunity. I've been building a case, she continued, documenting everything I can remember, tracking down other witnesses following the money trail. The problem is that most of the evidence is either classified or destroyed, but there are still a few people out there who know what really happened. People like me. Exactly. You. A communications specialist named Torres who was at the base that night and a pilot who flew the evacuation mission. Torres died in a training accident 18 months ago. The pilot transferred out of the military and disappeared. That leaves you. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. You think they killed Torres? I think Torres was asking too many questions, just like I was. And I think the pilot got smart and ran before they could get to him. Which brings us to tonight. Marcus looked at her more carefully, noticing details he had missed before. The way she favored her left side suggested injuries that went beyond what a car accident would cause. Her hands, while steady, showed recent abrasions that looked like defensive wounds. This wasn't really a car accident, was it? Oh, the accident was real enough, Thompson said. But it wasn't random road rage or a drunk driver. 2 men in a black SUV forced me off the road, then came to finish the job. They didn't expect me to be conscious and armed. What happened to them? Let's just say they won't be reporting back to whoever sent them. But this was just the opening move. They know I'm getting close to something big and they're done being subtle about it. Marcus realized that by being in this room, by listening to her story, he had already crossed a line. Whether he wanted to be involved or not, he was now part of whatever Thompson was investigating. The people she was hunting would view him as a threat simply because he possessed knowledge they wanted buried. "So what happens now?" he asked. Thompson reached into her jacket pocket, wincing slightly at the movement, and pulled out a small digital device that looked like a modified smartphone. "Now we finish what Sarah started. I've been tracking financial records, trying to follow the money from these weapons sales. The amounts are staggering. Millions of dollars flowing through accounts that shouldn't exist, traced back to operations that were never officially authorized. And you think this device has evidence? This device has bank routing numbers, transaction records, and communications intercepts that prove who's behind the conspiracy. But more importantly, it has the location of a warehouse where they're currently storing stolen military equipment worth tens of millions of dollars." Marcus stared at the device, understanding that it represented both opportunity and danger. If Thompson was right, they had evidence that could expose a conspiracy that reached high into military command structure. But they also had a target painted on their backs that would only get bigger the longer they held on to that information. "Why should I trust you?" Marcus asked. "For all I know, you're part of the conspiracy yourself, testing my loyalty or trying to see how much I remember." Thompson smiled for the first time since he had entered the room. "Because if I were part of the conspiracy, you'd already be dead. And because deep down you know I'm telling the truth. You've spent 3 years wondering what really happened that night, haven't you? Wondering why the official story never made sense?" She was right, and Marcus knew it. The questions had never really gone away, just been pushed down by the demands of daily life and the weight of military discipline. But now those questions were back, demanding answers that only Thompson seemed able to provide. Marcus made his decision in the space between heartbeats, driven by a combination of duty, curiosity, and the growing certainty that Thompson was telling the truth. "What do you need from me?" Thompson's expression shifted from guarded hope to grim determination. "First, I need you to access medical records from that night. As the attending corpsman, you would have had to file injury reports for everyone you treated. Those reports contain details that don't appear in the sanitized mission files. Those records are classified. Even if I could access them, downloading or copying them would be a court-martial offense." "I'm not asking you to steal them," Thompson said. "I just need you to confirm certain details. Times, names, types of injuries. Information that can help me correlate what I already know with what actually happened." Marcus nodded slowly. His access credentials to the military medical database were still active, and he could review files related to cases he had personally handled. It would be risky, but not immediately illegal. "Second," Thompson continued, "I need a safe place to recover for a few days. Whatever medical excuse you can provide to keep me here or somewhere similar, while I figure out my next move." That was easier. Marcus had enough autonomy in patient care decisions to recommend observation for potential head injuries. A few days of monitoring would be completely justifiable given her accident. "And third," Marcus asked, sensing there was more. "Third, I need you to help me contact the pilot, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park. She left the military 14 months ago and has been living off the grid ever since, but I think I know where to find her." Marcus felt the familiar weight of crossing another line, moving from passive involvement to active participation in whatever Thompson was planning. "You want me to help you track down someone who obviously doesn't want to be found?" "I want you to help me save her life," Thompson corrected. "Because if I found her trail, so will they. And unlike me, she doesn't know they're coming." Before Marcus could respond, the examination room door opened and Dr. Chen stepped inside. Marcus felt his heart rate spike, wondering how much of their conversation she might have overheard. But the attending physician's expression remained professionally neutral as she reviewed Thompson's chart. "How's our patient, Corpsman Rodriguez?" Dr. Chen asked, her eyes moving between Marcus and Thompson with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen thousands of similar cases. "Stable condition?" Marcus replied, falling back on familiar medical terminology. "Multiple contusions, possible mild concussion. I'd recommend observation for the next 24 to 48 hours. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes on the electronic tablet she carried. "Any signs of internal bleeding or neurological issues?" "Vitals are stable, pupils responsive. Some disorientation, which could be consistent with head trauma or shock from the accident." Thompson played her part perfectly, appearing groggy and slightly confused when Dr. Chen conducted her own brief examination. It was a convincing performance made easier by the fact that she genuinely was injured and exhausted. "We'll get you set up in a room upstairs," Dr. Chen told Thompson. "Standard monitoring protocols, nothing too invasive. You should be able to rest comfortably while we make sure there are no complications." After Dr. Chen left, Marcus felt the weight of what he had just committed to. By recommending extended observation, he had bought Thompson time and safety, but he had also made himself an active participant in her investigation. "Room 314, Marcus said when the transport orderly arrived to move Thompson upstairs. "I'll check on you during my break." 2 hours later, Marcus found himself alone in the hospital's medical records office, using his authorized access to pull up files from September 3 years ago. The computer system required multiple authentication steps, each one creating a digital trail that could be traced back to him later. But he had come too far to turn back now. The files were there exactly as he remembered filing them, but as he read through his own reports, Marcus began to notice discrepancies he had missed at the time. The timeline didn't match his memory of events. Patients he remembered treating weren't listed, while others appeared who he didn't recall seeing. Most significantly, his report on Sarah Mitchell had been altered. The description of her injuries had been changed, the estimated time of treatment modified, and several details about the equipment found with her had been completely removed. Someone had gone through his medical files and edited them to match whatever story they wanted to tell. Marcus printed copies of everything, knowing that he was probably triggering security protocols but no longer caring. If Thompson was right about the scope of this conspiracy, playing by the rules would only get them killed. When he reached room 314, he found Thompson awake and alert despite the late hour. She had changed into hospital scrubs, and the civilian clothes she had been wearing were folded neatly on a chair. Marcus noticed that she had positioned herself with a clear view of both the door and the window, and her hand rested casually near a water pitcher that could serve as an improvised weapon. "Any luck with the files?" she asked. Marcus handed her the printed documents. "Someone's been editing my reports. Details have been changed, names removed, timelines altered. It's subtle, but once you know what to look for, the discrepancies are obvious." Thompson scanned through the papers quickly, her expression growing darker with each page. "This confirms what I suspected. They've been systematically altering evidence for years, probably every piece of documentation related to that night. Which means anyone who tries to investigate will find a paper trail that supports the official story." "Exactly, but they made one mistake." Thompson pulled out her modified device again. They couldn't alter medical supply records without triggering automated audits. And medical supplies tell their own story about what really happened. She showed Marcus a series of requisition forms displayed on the small screen. "Look at what was ordered for your unit in the days before that mission. Emergency surgical supplies, blood products, trauma kits, far more than would be needed for a routine patrol." Marcus studied the lists, his medical training helping him interpret the significance of what had been requested. These supplies are for treating combat injuries. Severe trauma, multiple casualties. Someone knew in advance that people were going to be badly hurt. Or they were planning to make sure people got hurt, Thompson said grimly. Sarah found similar patterns at other bases, other operations. Always the same signature. Medical supplies ordered in advance. Mission parameters that didn't match the equipment being carried, and afterward, official reports that bore no resemblance to what actually happened. Marcus realized they were looking at evidence of a conspiracy that had been operating for years, possibly decades. The theft and sale of military equipment was just part of it. These people were also willing to sacrifice American soldiers to protect their operation. "You said you knew where to find the pilot," Marcus said. "Staff Sergeant Park," Thompson nodded. "She's been working as a flight instructor at a small airport in Montana, using her maiden name. Staying off the radar, paying cash for everything, never staying in one place too long. Smart tactics, but not smart enough. How do we contact her without exposing her location to the wrong people?" "Very carefully," Thompson said. "And we do it soon because I have reason to believe they're already closing in on her." Marcus looked out the hospital room window at the darkness beyond, knowing that somewhere out there, people were making plans that involved silencing anyone who knew the truth about what had happened in Afghanistan. The safe, predictable world of emergency medicine suddenly felt very far away. The next morning brought new complications that Marcus hadn't anticipated. As he arrived for his shift, Dr. Chen pulled him aside with a concerned expression that immediately put him on alert. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, leading him to her office and closing the door. "I had some interesting visitors last night asking about our patient in room 314. Marcus felt his stomach drop, but kept his expression neutral. "Oh?" Two men claiming to be military investigators. They had proper identification, but something felt off about them. They wanted access to Sergeant Thompson's medical records and asked very specific questions about the staff who had treated her. "What kind of questions?" Dr. Chen leaned against her desk, studying Marcus carefully. "They wanted to know who had conducted her initial examination, how long you had spent with her, whether she had said anything unusual. When I told them I couldn't release medical information without proper authorization, they became quite insistent." Marcus realized that Thompson's enemies had moved faster than either of them had expected. The men Dr. Chen described weren't legitimate investigators. They were cleanup crew, sent to assess the situation and eliminate any loose ends. Did they say when they'd be back? "They mentioned returning today with proper paperwork. But Marcus, I've been doing this for 15 years and something about those men made my skin crawl. They asked too many questions about you specifically." The warning was clear. Marcus was no longer just a potential witness. He was a target. His involvement with Thompson had been noticed, and now he was marked for elimination just as surely as she was. "I need to check on Sergeant Thompson," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "She's not there," Dr. Chen replied. "Discharged herself against medical advice about an hour ago. Left this for you." She handed Marcus a sealed envelope with his name written on it in Thompson's precise handwriting. Inside was a brief note and what looked like a parking garage ticket. Level 3, Section B, blue Honda Civic. Keys under the driver's side floor mat. The device is in the spare tire compartment. "If you're reading this, they found me faster than I expected. The pilot is at Glacier Sky Airport, Hangar 7. You have maybe 24 hours before they reach her. Trust no one in uniform." RT Marcus stared at the note, realizing that Thompson had prepared for the possibility of being discovered. She had planned escape routes and contingencies, treating their investigation like the military operation it had become. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said gently, "I don't know what's going on here, but I've seen enough to know you're in danger. These men who came looking for information weren't the kind of people who take no for an answer." Marcus made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Dr. Chen, I need to ask for emergency leave. Family situation. I know it's short notice, but it's urgent." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Take whatever time you need. And Marcus, be careful. Whatever this is about, it's bigger than a simple car accident." An hour later, Marcus found himself in the parking garage, locating the blue Honda Civic exactly where Thompson had indicated. The keys were where she had promised, and a quick check of the spare tire compartment revealed the device she had shown him, along with a folder containing documents he hadn't seen before. As he drove out of the garage, Marcus caught sight of two men in dark suits entering the elevator. They matched Dr. Chen's description of the supposed investigators, and their timing suggested they were there to intercept him. Thompson's early departure might have saved both their lives. The drive to Montana felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than his actual life. Marcus had never been involved in anything more dangerous than treating combat injuries, and now he was driving across the country to warn a woman he had never met that assassins were hunting her. The documents Thompson had left provided more details about the conspiracy they were investigating. Financial records showed millions of dollars flowing through offshore accounts tied to military procurement contracts. Communication intercepts revealed code names and meeting locations. Most disturbing were the casualty reports from various operations over the past 5 years. American soldiers killed under suspicious circumstances, always in situations where they might have witnessed evidence of weapons trafficking. Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just theft or corruption. It was systematic murder of anyone who threatened to expose the operation. Sarah Mitchell Torres, and potentially dozens of others had died to protect secrets that went to the highest levels of military command. Glacier Sky Airport was a small civilian facility nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains. As Marcus drove through the entrance, he marveled at how isolated it was, the perfect place for someone to hide from the world. But isolation also meant vulnerability. If Thompson's enemies had tracked Staff Sergeant Park here, there would be nowhere to run. Hangar 7 sat at the far end of the airport, separated from the main terminal by several hundred yards of empty tarmac. As Marcus approached, he could see a small aircraft inside the open hangar bay, and a figure in mechanic's coveralls working on the engine. The woman looked up as Marcus parked nearby, her hand moving instinctively toward what was probably a concealed weapon. Even in civilian clothes, Jennifer Park maintained the alert posture of someone with military training. Her eyes assessed Marcus quickly, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "My name is Marcus Rodriguez. I'm a Navy corpsman." "I think Sergeant Thompson sent you my information." Park's expression shifted from wariness to recognition. "Thompson's alive?" "Last I heard, she had disappeared from her assignment. She's alive, but barely. Someone tried to kill her 2 nights ago. The same people who killed Sarah Mitchell and Torres." Park's face went pale. "Torres is dead?" "Training accident officially. But Thompson has evidence that it was murder, just like what happened to your unit in Afghanistan." Park looked around the empty hangar, then gestured for Marcus to follow her to a small office area tucked into one corner. The space was spartanly furnished but comfortable, clearly set up as a temporary living area for someone who didn't want to leave too many traces in official records. "I've been waiting for this day for over a year," Park said, sinking into a chair that faced the hangar entrance. "I knew they'd eventually track me down. That's why I've been moving every few months, never staying anywhere long enough to establish patterns." "Thompson says you were the pilot for the evacuation mission that night. You saw what happened." "I saw enough," Park replied grimly. "The official story said we were picking up casualties from an enemy ambush. But the coordinates I was given took me to a location where American forces were fighting each other. I watched our own people execute wounded soldiers to prevent them from talking." Marcus felt sick. The extent of the betrayal was worse than he had imagined. "Mitchell and Thompson tried to stop it," Park continued. "They had been gathering evidence for months, building a case against the officers involved. But someone tipped off the conspirators. What was supposed to be an arrest operation turned into a massacre. How many people died? 8 soldiers that night, plus however many have been killed since to cover it up. But that's not the worst part." Park stood and moved to a window that provided a view of the surrounding mountains. The weapons they were stealing weren't just being sold to foreign buyers. Some of them were being provided to terrorist groups specifically to create incidents that would justify increased military spending. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. They were engineering attacks on American forces, creating a market for their stolen products while generating political support for more military appropriations. It's the perfect criminal enterprise. They steal the weapons, sell them to enemies who use them against American soldiers, then profit from the increased defense spending that results from the attacks. Marcus realized they weren't just dealing with theft or even murder. This was treason on a scale that threatened national security and had already cost countless American lives. "We have to stop them," Marcus said. Park laughed bitterly. "With what? Thompson's evidence? Even if we could get it to the right people, how do we know who to trust? This conspiracy involves people with enough rank and influence to alter official records and eliminate witnesses. For all we know, the people we'd report to are part of the problem. So what do we do?" Before Park could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the tarmac. Through the hangar opening, Marcus could see 3 black SUVs speeding toward them, kicking up dust clouds in their wake. "We run," Park said, already moving toward the aircraft. "And we hope Thompson's evidence is enough to bring these bastards down, because we may not get another chance." Park moved with the efficiency of someone who had planned for this exact scenario. While Marcus watched the approaching vehicles with growing dread, she was already starting the aircraft's engine and checking instruments with practice speed. "Get in," she shouted over the engine noise. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they get here." Marcus hesitated for a split second, realizing that climbing into that aircraft would mark the point of no return. Once he fled with Park, he would be a fugitive from whatever authority these men represented. But the alternative was staying to face people who had already demonstrated their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. He climbed into the co-pilot seat as Park completed her pre-flight checks at record speed. Through the windscreen, he could see the black SUVs getting closer. Close enough now to make out armed figures inside. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked as Park taxied the small plane out of the hangar. "Thompson gave me emergency coordinates before she went underground," Park replied, her hand steady on the controls despite the circumstances. There's a private airstrip in Nevada where we're supposed to meet if everything went wrong. The aircraft lifted off just as the first SUV reached the hangar. Marcus looked down to see men in tactical gear emerging from the vehicles, weapons drawn. Several of them pointed up at the departing plane, and Marcus wondered if they would actually shoot at aircraft in civilian airspace. His question was answered when he heard metallic impacts against the fuselage. They were indeed shooting, though whether they were trying to bring down the plane or simply disable it was unclear. "Are we hit?" Marcus asked, trying to keep panic out of his voice. "Nothing critical," Park replied, banking the aircraft sharply to put distance between them and the airport. "These aren't military shooters. If they were, we'd already be down." As they climbed to cruising altitude, Marcus tried to process what had just happened. In the space of 3 days, he had gone from routine emergency room duty to fleeing for his life from what appeared to be government agents. The transformation felt too rapid to be real. "How long have you known this day would come?" he asked Park. "Since the day I left the military," she replied. "I knew they'd track me down eventually. The only question was whether I'd be ready when they did." "And are you? Ready, I mean?" Park's smile was grim. "We're about to find out. The coordinates Thompson gave me lead to a place where we might be able to contact someone who can help. But it's going to require trusting people we've never met with our lives." The flight to Nevada took 4 hours, during which Park explained more about what she had witnessed that night in Afghanistan. The criminal conspiracy was even more extensive than Marcus had realized, involving not just stolen weapons but also fraudulent military contracts, embezzled reconstruction funds, and systematic elimination of witnesses. "The scariest part," Park said as they approached their destination, "is how high up this goes. We're not just talking about a few corrupt officers. This involves people with the authority to classify entire operations, people who can make inconvenient soldiers disappear without questions being asked." The airstrip in Nevada was little more than a cleared patch of desert with a windsock and a small fuel depot. As they landed, Marcus could see another aircraft already parked near what looked like an abandoned gas station. The isolation was complete. They were miles from the nearest town, surrounded by empty desert in all directions. A figure emerged from the building as they taxied to a stop. Even at a distance, Marcus could tell it was Thompson, moving carefully but under her own power. Relief flooded through him at seeing her alive and apparently unharmed. "How did you get here?" Marcus asked as they climbed down from the aircraft. "Same way you did, just with a longer head start," Thompson replied. "I've been planning escape routes for months. The moment I realized they'd found me at the hospital, I activated emergency protocols. The abandoned gas station turned out to be anything but abandoned. Inside, sophisticated communications equipment hummed quietly, and multiple computer workstations displayed data that Marcus didn't recognize but that seemed to fascinate Thompson. "Welcome to our temporary command center," she said. "Courtesy of some friends who prefer to remain unnamed but who have their own reasons for wanting to see this conspiracy exposed." "What kind of friends?" Park asked suspiciously. "The kind who work for agencies that compete with the military for funding and who don't appreciate having their operations compromised by criminal elements within the Pentagon," Thompson replied. "They can't act officially without proof, but they can provide resources for people who are willing to gather that proof." Marcus realized they had gained allies, but allies whose motivations might be just as questionable as their enemies. The world of intelligence and counterintelligence was full of people who used others as expendable assets in larger games. "What's the plan?" he asked. Thompson activated one of the workstations, displaying a map of the eastern United States with several locations marked in red. "The evidence I've gathered points to a major weapons transfer happening tomorrow night. Millions of dollars worth of stolen military equipment being moved from a warehouse in Virginia to ships waiting at Norfolk Naval Base." "And then what? We call the FBI?" "We document everything," Thompson said. "Video evidence of American military personnel loading stolen weapons onto ships bound for foreign ports. Evidence that can't be denied or classified away." Park studied the map carefully. "This warehouse is going to be heavily guarded, and if they're moving that much equipment, there will be multiple checkpoints and security layers. Which is why we're not going in on the ground," Thompson said. "We're going to use the same method they used against us: air surveillance. Park can fly reconnaissance while Marcus and I position ourselves to document the transfer from concealed locations." Marcus felt the familiar weight of crossing another line. They were moving from passive witnesses to active participants in an operation that could either expose the conspiracy or get them all killed. "What about afterward?" he asked. "Even if we get the evidence, how do we ensure it reaches the right people?" Thompson smiled for the first time since he had met her. "That's where our unnamed friends come in. They've already prepared dead man switches, automated systems that will release all our evidence to multiple news outlets and congressional committees if we don't check in at specified intervals. Insurance policy," Park said approvingly. "Exactly. The people hunting us know that killing us now will only guarantee their exposure. It changes the calculation from murder to damage control." Marcus looked around the command center, at the equipment that represented resources he hadn't imagined were available to them. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day Sarah died," Thompson replied. "I knew I couldn't trust official channels, so I started building unofficial ones. It's taken 3 years to put all the pieces in place, but tomorrow night we finally get to use them." Outside, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a landscape that seemed to mirror the isolation Marcus felt from his former life. But inside the converted gas station, surrounded by evidence of careful planning and powerful allies, he began to feel something he hadn't experienced since this all began. Hope. The conspiracy that had killed Sarah Mitchell and so many others was about to be exposed. The only question now was whether they would survive long enough to see justice served. As night fell over the Nevada desert, Marcus found himself checking weapons and equipment he barely knew how to use, preparing for an operation that would either vindicate years of investigation or end in the deaths of the only people who knew the truth about what had happened in Afghanistan. Tomorrow night, one way or another, the long hunt for justice would finally come to an end. The warehouse complex in Virginia looked deceptively quiet from their concealed position a quarter-mile away. Marcus lay prone on a hillside covered with thick brush, using military-grade surveillance equipment to watch the facility where stolen weapons worth millions of dollars waited to be shipped overseas. Beside him, Thompson monitored radio communications while tracking the movements of security personnel through thermal imaging. They had been in position for 6 hours, watching patterns and timing, waiting for the operation to begin. Park circled overhead in a civilian aircraft, maintaining radio silence but ready to document everything from the air when the signal came. "Movement at the main gate," Thompson whispered, her voice barely audible through their communication headsets. 3 military transport trucks, armed escort vehicles. This is it. Marcus adjusted his camera equipment, high-resolution devices capable of identifying faces and reading serial numbers from their current distance. Everything they recorded would be transmitted in real time to their allies, ensuring that even if they were discovered, the evidence would survive. Through his telephoto lens, Marcus could see uniformed figures directing the trucks toward loading bays at the rear of the warehouse. The precision of their movement suggested this was a well-rehearsed operation. Not the first time weapons had been moved through this facility. "I recognize that, Colonel," Thompson said, studying her own surveillance display. "Colonel Davidson, assigned to Pentagon procurement. He's supposed to be overseeing legitimate weapons transfers to allied nations. Instead, he's running his own private arms dealing business," Marcus replied, focusing his camera on the officer's face. The irony wasn't lost on him that Davidson wore the same uniform Marcus had served under, had taken the same oath to defend the Constitution. The warehouse doors opened, revealing the scope of the operation inside. Crate after crate of military equipment emerged on forklifts: assault rifles, heavy machine guns, anti-tank missiles, communications gear. Marcus recognized much of the equipment as items that had been reported stolen or lost in various theaters of operation over the past 5 years. "Jesus," Thompson breathed. "There's enough firepower in there to equip a small army. Or several terrorist cells," Marcus added grimly, thinking about what Park had told him regarding the ultimate destination of some of these weapons. As they watched, a pattern became clear. The operation was divided into multiple shipments. Some crates were loaded onto trucks that Marcus recognized as heading toward legitimate military installations, weapons that would be reported as delivered to authorized recipients. But other crates, the ones marked with codes that didn't appear in any official inventory, were being loaded onto different vehicles. "The mixing operation," Thompson explained quietly. "They're combining legitimate weapons transfers with stolen equipment. Anyone checking shipping manifests will see authorized deliveries, But the thieves are adding extra cargo that never appears on the official records. Marcus filmed everything, capturing faces, license plates, serial numbers, anything that could be used to trace the conspiracy back to its sources. But as the operation continued, he began to notice something that made his blood run cold. "Thompson, look at those crates being loaded on truck number 3. She trained her scope on the vehicle Marcus had indicated, then cursed softly. "Those are the same markings we saw in Afghanistan. The equipment that killed Sarah." The crates bore stenciled codes that matched items Marcus remembered from that terrible night 3 years ago. Weapons that had been used to kill American soldiers were now being shipped to new buyers, probably to kill more Americans in future operations. "We need to get closer," Thompson said. "I want serial numbers from those specific weapons." Marcus knew she was right, but he also knew it meant exposing themselves to discovery. The warehouse perimeter was patrolled by armed guards, and getting close enough to read individual serial numbers would require crossing open ground under artificial lighting. "I'll go," Marcus said. "I'm the one with medical training. If something goes wrong, I have a better chance of talking my way out of it." Thompson started to protest, but Marcus was already moving. He had spent 3 years wondering about the weapons that had killed Sarah Mitchell. Now he had a chance to gather evidence that could ensure her killer's faced justice. The approach to the warehouse required crossing a drainage ditch and then moving along a fence line that provided minimal concealment. Marcus used techniques he had learned during combat medical training, moving in short rushes between cover points, timing his movements to avoid guard patrols. He reached a position where he could clearly see the serial numbers on the weapons being loaded into Truck 3. Through his camera's zoom function, he documented dozens of individual items, building a catalog that could be cross-referenced with theft reports and battlefield recovery records. But as he prepared to withdraw, Marcus heard voices approaching his position. 2 guards were conducting a patrol he hadn't anticipated, moving directly toward his hiding spot with flashlights and automatic weapons. Marcus froze, pressing himself against the ground and hoping his dark clothing would blend with the shadows. The guard stopped less than 10 feet from his position, close enough that he could hear their conversation clearly. "Colonel says we need to speed up the loading," one guard said. "Intel reports suggest federal agents might be watching the operation." "About time," the other replied. "I never liked working this close to Washington. Too many people asking questions. After tonight it won't matter. This is the last shipment from this location. Tomorrow we'll be working out of the new facility in Mexico." Marcus realized they were not just documenting a single weapons transfer, they were witnessing the end of an operation that was about to relocate beyond U.S. jurisdiction. If they didn't stop tonight's shipment, the conspiracy would disappear across the border where American law enforcement couldn't follow. The guards moved on, continuing their patrol route. Marcus waited until they were well clear, then began his careful withdrawal to Thompson's position. But as he reached the drainage ditch, floodlights suddenly blazed across the area, turning night into harsh day. "Security breach in Sector 7, a voice announced over loudspeakers. "All units respond." Marcus ran, abandoning stealth for speed as shouts and vehicle engines filled the night behind him. Thompson's voice crackled in his earpiece, providing guidance as he navigated back toward their concealed position. "They've spotted you, but they don't know where you came from," she reported. "Keep moving toward the extraction point." Marcus reached Thompson's position as armed figures began spreading out from the warehouse, conducting a systematic search of the surrounding area. They had minutes before the searchers would reach their hiding place. "Did you get what we needed?" Thompson asked as they packed their equipment. "Serial numbers, faces, shipping codes, everything," Marcus replied. "But there's more. This is their final operation at this location. Tomorrow they're moving the entire operation to Mexico." Thompson's expression shifted from satisfaction to urgency. "Then we can't wait for backup or official channels. We have to stop those trucks before they reach the port." "How?" "There are dozens of armed guards, multiple vehicles, and we're just 3 people with surveillance equipment." Thompson smiled grimly. "We're not just 3 people. Remember those unnamed friends I mentioned? They've been waiting for exactly this situation." She activated an emergency beacon, sending a coded signal into the night. Within minutes, Marcus could hear helicopters approaching from multiple directions, their sound signatures suggesting military rather than civilian aircraft. "Federal agents?" Marcus asked. "Better," Thompson replied. "Military police with proper jurisdiction and firepower. Our evidence has been transmitted to people who finally have enough proof to act officially. The warehouse complex erupted into chaos as helicopters descended with spotlights blazing. Armed figures in military police uniforms fast roped to the ground, surrounding the facility before the conspirators could react. The trucks filled with stolen weapons found themselves blocked by armored vehicles, their escape routes sealed. From their concealed position, Marcus watched as Colonel Davidson and dozens of others were taken into custody. The weapons that had traveled so far from their intended destinations were finally being reclaimed by legitimate authority. "It's over," Thompson said, the exhaustion of 3 years finally showing in her voice. "Sarah can rest now." Marcus thought about the emblem that had started this entire journey, the symbol worn by soldiers who had died trying to expose the truth. Their sacrifice had finally led to justice, though it had taken far longer and cost far more than anyone should have had to pay. 6 months later, Marcus returned to his duties at Walter Reed Medical Center, where Dr. Chen welcomed him back with questions he still couldn't fully answer. The trials of Colonel Davidson and his co-conspirators were classified, the evidence sealed away in files that might never see public light. But late at night, when Marcus treated wounded soldiers returning from overseas deployments, he knew that some of them owed their lives to weapons that had been recovered rather than sold to their enemies. The conspiracy that had killed Sarah Mitchell was broken, its members facing justice in military courts. Thompson had returned to active duty, assigned to a new unit with a mission Marcus wasn't cleared to know about, but he suspected she was still hunting conspiracies, still working to ensure that soldiers like Sarah Mitchell would never die in vain. The emblem that had frozen Marcus in an emergency room doorway now served as a reminder of how far ordinary people could go when they refused to let injustice stand. Sometimes the most important battles were fought not on foreign battlefields, but in the shadows of institutions that were supposed to protect the very people they endangered. Marcus kept a small photograph of Sarah Mitchell on his desk, a reminder that some secrets were worth dying to expose, and that the courage to seek truth could be found in the most unexpected places. The quiet corpsman who had once frozen at the sight of an emblem had learned that sometimes the greatest act of service was refusing to stay silent, when silence served only those who profited from betrayal.